One of my earliest cocktail fascinations was the Sazerac, and in an effort to branch out from there, I stumbled across another New Orleans classic whiskey drink called the Vieux Carre. The Sazerac's history actually goes back to when the drink was made with Cognac rather than Rye Whisky, and now the Sazerac that most people know is one that's made with a base of rye. Some people still make it with a base of Cognac, or they'll split the base. This is one where the agreed upon spec is a split base. Split base just means that the spirit in the drink is more than one thing. Usually it's an even split, but it doesn't have to be. This is an even split in the spirit base between rye whiskey and cognac. Vieux Carre in French, or Vieux Carre, it's usually pronounced Vieux Carre in New Orleans, means old square. And there's some historicity connected to all the different countries where these different ingredients come from. And part of that points to the number of countries that are represented in this cocktail. Angostura Bitters come from Trinidad and Tobago. There's some French ingredients, American ingredients, and even the Sweet Vermouth is from Italy. The Sweet Vermouth I will say that I'm using today is Punta-Mess. This is one that I particularly like. I would say that a more traditional Sweet Vermouth, like a Coqui de Chirino or a Carpano Antica or a Carpano Classico, might be a better fit for this drink historically. This is just the way that I like to drink it. Do either one as you please. And this is one that I mentioned if you wanted to batch up for a New Orleans themed Super Bowl party, this could be a great candidate. So I'll just be making a single serving today, but I'll go ahead and drop a recipe for a full bottle, like a 750 ml version as well, in case you want to do that. Let's get mixing. So we're going to use, like I said, a split base of two different spirits here. We're going to use an ounce of rye whiskey first. We'll also do an ounce of cognac. Both spirits have a lot of history in New Orleans drinks. A lot of recipes will call for an even amount of these first three ingredients and then a little bit less of the Benedictine. I'm gonna actually do a little bit less of the Sweet Vermouth than the first two ingredients, partially because of the Sweet Vermouth I'm using, but also just partially because this is a pretty sweet drink and I like to tone that down a little bit. So 3/4 of an ounce of this Punta-Mess or whatever Sweet Vermouth you have on hand. I'll also call out that this, even though it is a split base, is kind of like a Manhattan riff in that you got about 2 parts spirit. I'm doing a little bit less than 1 part of the Sweet Vermouth, but I'm also adding another sweetener, which is this Benedictine, and that kind of balances very similarly to how a Manhattan would be built. I'm just going to do a 1/3 of an ounce of Benedictine. Some will call up to a 1/2 ounce of Benedictine, but I think the cure book actually only calls for 1/4, so I'm kind of splitting the difference there, especially since I'm reducing the Sweet Vermouth. 1/3 of an ounce. And then that's it for the full-sized bottles, but do not forget the bitters. This one, it's kind of fun, uses 2 different kinds of bitters, both Angostura and Peychauds. So Angostura, very classic in an old-fashioned or in a Manhattan. 2 of those. And then also Peychauds are very common in a Sazerac. So you kind of get to play with both of those herbal qualities. That's 2 dashes of each. We'll get some ice and we'll stir. I've also got a nice big clear cube here to use for this drink. Not totally required, but kind of helps lift the visual appearance a little bit. We'll stir this for about 25-30 seconds. Looks great, smells great. And then we'll do a little orange garnish. I didn't realize until after I stopped filming last week that I didn't even garnish that Ramos Gin Fizz. I think I was just so excited about the presentation I skipped right over it, but we are going to garnish this one today. Squeeze those citrus oils over the surface, then give this swath a twist. Drop it in. Cheers. Obviously, whenever you garnish a drink like that and then smell it immediately, the first thing that you'll smell is that citrus aroma, but there's a lot more going on in this one. It does kind of smell like a Manhattan, but you can also smell those Peychaud's bitters, which just bring it a, to me, very classic New Orleans aroma. It's not nearly as licoricey as a Sazerac because the Sazerac has that absinthe quality. I usually spritz it right into the glass. But there's a little bit of that licoricey quality that still comes from the Peychaud's that is present here. Great sipper for dinner, I would say, or a kind of an aperitif style cocktail. There is quite a bit of sweetness to it, and it has plenty of booze quality as well from the rye and the cognac, and so serving this over a big cube lets you enjoy it over a really long period of time if you wanted to sip on it that way. Even though it can be a little bit sweet up front, I think if you don't add either a high enough quantity of the Sweet Vermouth or of the Benedictine, you're going to be left with something that is a little bit too boozy and maybe even a little bit too bitter. Obviously I use the Punta Mess and I like that bitterness, but even just 4 dashes total of bitters between the Angostura and the Peychauds can punch through pretty sharp as well. I think this one's balanced really well, but if you're using Punta Mess and don't want quite as much bitterness, feel free to use less of that, or just use a more standard Sweet Vermouth like the recipe would probably call for. That's all for the Vieux Carre today, and that concludes this short 2-episode New Orleans series. I'll also put the Sazerac in the playlist too, so you can have a trio of New Orleans classics. At the end of the day, drinks are for fun, and my goal with this channel is to teach people enough so they can share that fun with the people they love. Come and be amazed at what you can do.